Hey up Internet and welcome to On the Sofa Live. If you're new, do subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay in the loop. This is from Owen Jones' Battle Lines. At the Telegraph, support for Israel is now mandatory. The Daily Telegraph is being acquired by a German-based media giant, and now its journalists are formally expected to support Israel. The Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has cleared the takeover by Alex Brenner SE. Its CEO, Matthias Dopfner, has written to Telegraph staff outlining his commitment to the paper. An employee at the Telegraph has sent me the letter. It is deeply revealing. Dopfner insists that the values of the Telegraph and the publishing house founded by late tycoon Alex Springer, dubbed Germany's Rupert Murdoch, are aligned. They are, he says, freedom, free markets, individual freedom, and freedom of speech. He goes further. Axel Springer, he explains, is guided by a clear editorial compass. Its employees are rooted in its essentials, core values to which we are firmly committed. There is, he adds, no such thing as neutral journalism. Only journalism that is pluralistic and surprising, fair and fact-based. And yet, having invoked freedom of speech as a foundational principle, he insists these essentials are not partisan, but rather define a socio-political framework within which maximum journalistic freedom and intellectual independence can flourish. We support the right of Israel to exist. Dopfner then sets out those essentials. 1. We stand for freedom, freedom of expression, the rule of law and democracy. 2. We support the right of Israel to exist and oppose all forms of anti-Semitism. 3. We advocate the transatlantic alliance between the United States and Europe. 4. We uphold the principles of a free market economy. 5. We reject political and religious extremism, as well as all forms of discrimination. Note, where we support the right of Israel to exist sits second. Freedom within limits. Dopfner emphasizes the editorial independence will be protected, including from pressure by politicians, celebrities, or advertisers. I value debate in the spirit of pluralism and freedom of expression, he writes. But the description of essentials is frankly Orwellian. It is not reconcilable to argue that these tenets create the conditions for maximum journalistic freedom while simultaneously requiring adherence to a political position on a specific foreign state. Out of 193 UN member states, only one is singled out in this way. No state has a right to exist under international law. Peoples have a right to self-determination, a right denied in this case by Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian land, and by subjecting its people to apartheid, colonialism, and genocide. A Telegraph journalist put it to me bluntly. To be firmly told by a new parent company to be's CEO that the second most important guiding principle is affirming the right of a country committing genocide and ethnic cleansing is more than a little concerning. It also raises the question of how any reporting from the paper can be considered factual if that is our core principle. Yeah, and this is the thing, isn't it? How can the Telegraph, how can anything reported by the Telegraph concerning Israel be considered factual after this? I don't think it can, because they're obviously going to have a bias towards Israel, aren't they? They're going to have an Israel bias now. Everything they say is going to be in Israel's favor, and it's basically going to be a propaganda tool for Israel. If this goes ahead, which it seems likely it will. The Telegraph was, already has the nickname the Tory graph because it has a bias towards the Conservative Party and conservatism, more generally. But now it seems to me like it's going to be just a propaganda tool for the state of Israel. So you can't trust a word that this newspaper says anymore. I mean, you couldn't before, but even less so now. This, it's utterly ridiculous. What Israel's right to exist means in practice. In practice, the phrase Israel's right to exist has been repeatedly deployed by Israel's cheerleaders across the West to justify Israel's crimes, from occupation and colonialism to apartheid and now mass destruction in Gaza. It is also telling what is not said. The essentials do not prohibit racism in general. Despite later rejecting all forms of discrimination, there is no explicit rejection of Islamophobia, for example, or anti-Arab racism. Instead, oppose all forms of anti-Semitism is fused directly with support the right of Israel to exist. That conflation matters because we know that defenders of Israel have repeatedly blurred the line between anti-Semitism and opposition to the actions of the Israeli state. So how exactly might Axel Springer, SE, interpret oppose all forms of anti-Semitism? Yeah, that is a good question posed by Owen Jones. A very good question. Free Palestine is a pro-Hamas topic. There are very strong clues. Let's put it that way. The late Axel Springer himself declared, "It is the task of our generation to stand firmly by Israel's side, even if this causes difficulties for our policies elsewhere." He further added, "The country does not need encouragement, but advocacy, whether and wherever it can be provided in the European community, in the United Nations, in diplomatic relations, at work, in the family." He described this as a German duty. In June 2021, when employees complained about the Israeli flag being raised at company headquarters, Matthias Dopfner responded, "I think, and I'm being very frank with you, a person who has issue with an Israeli flag being raised for 1 week here after anti-Semitism demonstrations should look for a new job. He was referring to demonstrations against Israel's assault on Gaza that May. In October 2023, a Lebanese employee at Welt TV, part of the Axel Springer empire, was dismissed. He says it was after he challenged the outlet's pro-Israel positions. Axel Springer SE refused to comment on individual personal matters. In an internal email, which was leaked that year, Döpfner reportedly summarized his political worldview with the phrase Zionism über alles, Zionism above all. He has penned repeated pro-Israel polemics. Will we stand with Israel against the enemies of freedom despite the risks, or will we allow fear and opportunism to prevail? He wrote in October 2023, demanding massive, unsitting political, financial, and military support. On a podcast for his employees, Döpfner claimed a majority on Instagram, on other social media, and in particular TikTok, took sides for the Hamas actions. He argued that an almost global wave of anti-Semitism sadly showed its ugly face, which he described as a shock despite knowing that it is here and there well hidden or presented in a politically correct manner as anti-Zionism or wokeism or whatever. And he said something deeply revealing about TikTok. Concretely, more than 4 million posts until today have been published under the hashtag of Free Palestine and other kind of pro-Hamas topics, and only 53,000 posts basically standing by Israel. Free Palestine, he argued, was a kind of pro-Hamas topic. Conflating anti-Semitism with critique of Israel. When Israel launched its first war on Iran last June, Döpfner declared it was surprising that Israel is not being celebrated worldwide for its historic, extremely precise and necessary strike. Instead, he claimed, the public response is dominated by anti-Israel propaganda. The intelligence and precision of Israel's actions are not admired, but instead used here and there to perpetrate blatantly anti-Semitic stereotypes. This attitude is characterized not only by racist undertones, but also by a strange self-forgetfulness. In other words, he directly conflated critique of Israel's war with anti-Semitism. A few months ago, he quoted claims about atrocities committed on October the 7th, which included a first responder testified before the Knesset that he had seen the severed skulls of 3 children. The claim that Israeli children were beheaded have been comprehensively debunked. He went on to write that justified criticism of decisions made by an Israeli government is mixed with deep-rooted hatred of Jews, and that as a result, instead of an obvious global wave of compassion and solidarity, a global wave of cold-heartedness and increasingly aggressive anti-Semitism has emerged. The piece further criticized the German government, Israel's most loyal European defender, for massively restricting arms sales to Israel. Tellingly, he said that decision meant that from now on, unconditional support for Israel's right to exist is effectively subject to conditions. He described the recognition of Palestinian statehood as a reward for the barbarism of October the 7th. Late October, Al Jazeera published an investigation into German tabloid Bild. A cornerstone of Axel Springer SE headlined "The Story of Israel's Propaganda Machine, Specializing in Anti-Palestinian Incitement." Al Jazeera reported that the newspaper had suggested that a Palestinian journalist killed by Israel was a terrorist, denied famine in Gaza, and published a lengthy report it claimed had been found on the computer of late Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. It transpired that the document was old, not authored by Sinwar, and had reportedly been leaked by Benjamin Netanyahu's office. The newspaper reported Al Jazeera had also consistently demonized pro-Gaza demonstrators in Germany, labeling them as mobs, Israel haters, and anti-Semites. Bild has described student protesters in the US as Judenhasser Studenten, Jew hater students, even though they included Jewish students. What happened to Jewish critics of Israel in Germany? We should also note the atmosphere in Germany in which anti-Semitism is widely conflated with critique of Israel, to the extent that Jewish people there have been repeatedly denounced, deplatformed, and arrested. Axel Springer SE's outlets have repeatedly singled out Jewish critics of Israel. Die Welt newspaper argued that Jewish American photographer Nan Goldin misused the opening of her retrospective at the New Nation Gallery to level serious accusations against Germany and Israel, supported by pro-Palestinian activists. Another article, attacked by Deborah Feldman, a Jewish American German writer who has spoken out about how the German government ignores the way dissenting Jews in Germany are being thrown under the same bus as they are in Israel. A piece in Bild said of her political views are close to conspiracy theories in Germany. One is not allowed to say what one wants. The police are infiltrated by right-wing extremists, and the Federal Republic is preventing peace in the Middle East, anti-Semitic subtext, because it obeys all-powerful Israel lobby. This is roughly the worldview of the author, who years ago also had a Netflix hit with her autobiographically inspired bestseller, Unorthodox. In other words, falsely suggesting a Jewish writer holds anti-Semitic views because of her opinions about Israel. I think I'm going to skip a bit and just get to the nub of the matter here. Owen Jones concludes this. What this means for the Telegraph. To be clear, the Telegraph has already had a partisan pro-Israel orientation, publishing multiple pieces justifying Israel's genocidal onslaught against Gaza. But this takeover embeds pro-Israel bias into the newspaper's very fabric. Its new owners are zealously pro-Israel and have repeatedly conflated anti-Semitism with critique of Israel. They claim that freedom of speech is a core value. The truth is that Israel supporters in the West have launched the biggest assault on free speech since the height of McCarthyism. We can see where the Telegraph's new owners stand on that. Worrying stuff. Yeah, this is worrying stuff. In my opinion, the Telegraph is going to become a tool of propaganda for Israel. But let me know what your thoughts are on this in the comments. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. And please do me a favor and like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and do leave a comment because that would really help me out with the algorithm. Okay, bye for now.